Let's see how this goes. Hi, this is another episode of Pastor in Quarantine from Corona, drinking coffee. So today the devotional is going to be about something that I think is really important, something that I think a lot of you might need to hear, mostly because I needed to hear it. And I read a devotional by a pastor that I respect very much, a theologian, John Piper. And he reminded me in his devotion about the sovereignty of God, about the fact that God is sovereign, that nothing takes him by surprise. And I think this is where it's one of those very difficult topics where people always seem to have the question, how can a good God allow bad things to happen? How is it that if God is so good that there's a pandemic going on? How is it that good people die? How is it that there's natural disasters? How is it, and so on and so forth. And if God is sovereign, then he is not only allowing these things to happen, but he is in control. And that's really hard to try to reconcile in our minds. But there's a story that he brought out that is a story from Genesis that I think is so appropriate. It's the story of Joseph. And if you don't know the story, quick synopsis. Joseph was sold into slavery by his own brothers who were jealous of him. And eventually, through this series of events of Joseph's life, it's crazy, you should go back and read it. It's in Genesis, and this kind of comes to the culmination of that story in Genesis chapter 50. And what has happened up to this point is that his father and brothers think that he is probably dead. His father thinks that he's dead because his brothers told his father that he was dead. And they think that he was a slave and probably worked to death. But what actually happened was, through Joseph's faithfulness to God, he was able to, no matter what circumstance he was in, whether he was a slave, he was able to be promoted to over all the slaves. If he was promoted to the second in command of Potiphar's house, and then he was put into a place where he was able to interpret a dream for a king, and then put over, second in command over all of Egypt. And the dream that he interpreted was that there would be 7 years of great wealth, of good crops, of healthy land, that would be followed by 7 years of drought. Well, the king took his advice. He believed his interpretation of the king's dream and put him in charge of making sure that they were ready for those 7 years of famine. So where we come in now is during that famine that the king's dream had prophesied that Joseph had interpreted for him. And so his brothers have showed up from their home, come to Egypt looking for food. And God has it orchestrated to where they have to ask Joseph for food. And so here we come, approaching Joseph. And once his brothers find out who he is, it says his brothers also came and fell down before him and said, "Behold, we are your servants." But Joseph said to them, "Do not fear, for am I in the place of God?" In other words, Should I judge you for your wrongdoing? Do I have the right to say anything about what you've done? As for you, this is Genesis 50, verse 20. As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. So, what we see in this story is that Joseph's brothers did an evil thing. There's no question about that. Selling your younger brother into slavery, that's bad. Don't do it. I don't care how much you don't like your siblings. It's a bad idea. It's wrong. But you notice it doesn't say, Joseph didn't tell them, you meant for evil against me, but God fixed it. He made it right. God salvaged what you did, because Joseph understood that God, the whole time, was in control. That thing that Joseph's brothers did to him, that all the pain and suffering that Joseph went through, even though it was difficult, even though it was bad, you can't tell me that it was a good thing, that he enjoyed being in prison, that he enjoyed going through trials and hardships and being in slavery. You can't tell me that he thought that those things were good. Just like a pandemic isn't a good thing. But he said God meant it for good, to bring about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. So what I'm telling you today is that not only can good things come out of difficult situations like this one, but that God means for good things to come out of the situations. That God has not been taken by surprise on this. God isn't going to try to fix things and try to salvage what has been messed up. He was in control the whole time, and he still is in control. And he will make good things happen out of this pandemic. We're not outside of God's sovereignty. God is in control. And that's really good, because there is good that will come out of this. And God never loses control. And when it comes down to it, we need to be able to trust him like Joseph did. We need to be able to say, no matter what position we're in, no matter where we're at, Joseph consistently throughout his life always followed God and trusted him. And despite being imprisoned, despite being looked over, despite all of the hardships that he went through, they all led up to him being in the right place at the right time that God had designated, because what his brothers meant for evil against Joseph, God meant it for good. That's encouraging, because God means for good to come out of our difficulty. He doesn't mean to keep us from difficulty. As much as we might want that, that's not how God's plans work most of the time. And so, be encouraged. Even when it gets difficult, God means it for good. And God wants to use us to do good in this world through this situation, not just in spite of it. God is sovereign. He is in control, and we can be encouraged by that. God bless.